This show is sponsored by the Comics Shop.
Welcome to Tuesday Chinwag with your host, Leigh Chalker, writer, artist, and creator of the comic series Battle for Buzzle.
All right, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Tuesday Chinwag. I am Leigh Chalker and I'm the creator of Battle for Bustle. Now that is available at the Comics Shop with over 100 other Australian published comic books. So the reason I mention the Comics Shop is because that sponsors all of the live streams and not just this show. And it keeps everyone happy, it keeps comics flowing, it gets them into your hands, and you can buy one comic book or you can buy all 100 of them. It's entirely up to you for a flat rate of $9. Now, I don't know where you're going to get any better than that, but hey, you know, like here, there you go. So for any of you that haven't seen Tuesday Chinwag, it's a show based on who, what, where, when, how, and why. And generally, you know, we cover all of them. It's about being fluid and as chatty and talk about the history of the guest as best as we can, getting into as much detail as you know, we can go anywhere for anyone that's seen the show, which is always exciting. And I like to be excited, you know, because it's I'm not a calm individual. It's and sometimes I've just got to burn off a lot of energy. Look, the best thing you can do for comics, the community, is you can like and subscribe anywhere you can find them, YouTube's, Facebook, and all the other socials. And please share the shows, because if we like and subscribe, we get it all out to, you know, like more people. It builds the community even further. And that's always exciting to bring new people and have new guests and hear their stories. Now, the other thing I want to mention before I introduce tonight's very special guest is on YouTube, we are at 499 subscribers as of today. So if there's anyone out there that's not subscribed, you could be the 500th person. And I think that's a pretty awesome thing for you know, this community to get to 500 subscribers. So, you know, check your notes, check if you're not subscribed, and press that bell, you know. So it's all good. And look, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce a man that he's going to have some stories to tell us. So I'm hoping that I get to sit back and just do an awful lot of learning tonight. So and I hope you do as well. Mr. David Bird, how are you, mate?
Good, mate. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm excited. I'm relaxed, but I'm excited, you know. So it's I'm not quite sure what I am at the moment, but I'm ready. But I'm ready to just chill out and you know, do some gas bagging, man. So look, what we'll do is to save anyone any dramas, or keep, you know, let's not keep them in suspense. We're just going to get straight into it, David, with the existential question. Who?
Okay, well, I'm the publisher of Paper Tabloid publications. I've been doing that on and off since about 1998, 99. Prior to that, I've been around, you know, I'm part of the Melbourne scene, been around the Melbourne scene for a long time. So did helped a few people on and off during the 90s, but during the 80s I was an assistant editor and finished artist for Fox Comics, the anthology. But I even go back earlier than that, because all the people that I know who did ink spots in 1980, that's Phil Bentley, Colin Proskevich, Greg Gates, and a host of other people who were contributors at the time. So I go as far as back as that. So read Silver Age Marvels and Bronze Age Marvels and DCs in the 60s and 70s, as well as Warren Comics in the 70s. That was the springboard onto all sorts of stuff from about 1975 onwards, in terms of European graphic novels to heavy metal and metal hurlant, undergrounds, rip-off press undergrounds, as well as the classic undergrounds from the late 60s. So, yeah, that's sort of my, that's where my background sort of comes from in terms of things that I like and things that I've been inspired by.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's exciting because I do want to touch on like Fox Comics tonight. Obviously, we'll get to that at some stage. But let's take you back to Little David, and because Melbourne, man, it's a hub of comic creators and people that have been around for, well, like continually doing it and believing in the medium, which is exciting for me and the history. So let's go back to Little David and who and what was it that was it? Did you have it? Like everyone seems to. This is did you have an uncle that introduced you to comic books, or was it a mum or a dad? Because it's like there's always that sneaky uncle there that flips
you a book. When I was really young, when I was in like 6 years old in grade 1 in primary school, so I was sick a lot of that year. So I was in bed. I had mumps and chickenpox and pneumonia and bronchitis. It seemed to be I get over one thing, I get something else. So there were always books. Books were bought for me and things to keep me occupied in bed while I'm recovering from these things. So I remember someone had left. Some visitor to the house had left a pile of old Gordon and Gotch reprints, black and white reprints. And they had 2 shillings on them because we hadn't reached decimalisation yet. So, so that was my first exposure to Batman and Superman, right? Then my parents and I moved to Queensland it ended up being about 18 months for my father's job. And I just continued buying those up there. And then when we decided we were coming back down to Melbourne to live, on the way down, they went out. We stopped at some country town called Narandra. I'm not sure whether that's in southern New South Wales or I think it's in southern New South Wales. I don't think we crossed the border yet. So when my folks were out getting lunch and they came back and I said, oh, Mum bought me a comic, but it was not a Gordon Gotch reprint. It was a copy of Marvel Tales with a reprint of Spider-Man 14 and 2 or 3 other stories that I'd seen these characters on Marvel Superheroes on TV. So I read, and it was in colour. So I read that. I thought, there's no going back now. There's this Dax on Batman and Superman as they then were. So that was it. And when we got down to Melbourne, I set about just buying those and increasing, starting a collection really.
You still got a lot of that stuff?
No, I've purged my collection a few times since then. So I haven't got that particular issue, even though it's sort of like, seared into my memory. I could just quote from it, right? Yeah. So, but I was lucky when I started buying new comics off the rack. I discovered a secondhand bookshop, which was an old book exchange. And I agree with you. It's a tragedy that they've disappeared.
The magic you used to find in those places.
Walking past and looking in the window, because there was a whole bunch of stuff hanging up the window, and sort of like it was like Aladdin's cave. My jaw sort of like smacked the footpath, right? And you could buy secondhand comics for back then. The brand new comic was still 12 cents, so you could buy them for six cents, right? And a thicker one for 12 cents. I know it sounds ridiculous now that I'm saying that, but it was just another era, really. So so I could feed my collection with new comics at one end and back issues at the other end. So that was that was heaven.
You were filling in the gaps where you could find them.
Absolutely.
Did you know where, like, you wouldn't have had? Did you have one? Were you like a comic book like Bloodhound Man? Did you have like this shop will have this one at this point? They're not carrying that title. I'll head over here.
Absolutely. I had my favourite news agents that I would go to that I knew I would get something, right? So and doing all the old tricks. If you didn't have enough money, you sort of bury the one you wanted behind a whole bunch of others and race home, try to get some money and run back and make sure it's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd stick them behind the dud comics. I know, man. You know, because you'd get you'd get you'd get so used to the rhythm and titles that flowed at your favorite comic like news agents and shops and stuff, that you could tell if one had been sitting there that extra month, man. You know,
Yeah.
no one was getting it, so you'd get you just zip it in between there. And it's like, yeah, I remember being guilty of that too, mate. You know, like, and being filthy like the next day or two coming back, and I think someone cottoned onto me, man. You know what I mean? They were checking all the comments, and I was like, "What?" You know, like, yeah. No, they were good, man. But I often, um, when I, get to meet people and stuff on Chinwag, I often reflect with them on the beauty of book exchanges and just how lovely they were, man. Where you could go, it's like you never knew what you were going to get. You know, like some weeks you go in there and it'd be an empty chest, and you'd just get a few things to test it, and then the next week you go in there and it was like, whoa, I've hit pay dirt here, man. Yeah, each week was totally different. What were you most attracted to by those early comic books? Like the sense of adventure, the storytelling, like the continuity. Like what sort of?
I guess it was the stories and the not just what was told, but the way it was told. And I could tell even at a young age the Marvel stories had more depth in them in terms of characterization than DC were doing at the time. You're not really, because you're a kid, you're not really deconstructing it at that point. But you sort of know, you can sort of tell the difference. So yes, I was a big Spider-Man fan, and like the first issue of Amazing Spider-Man I bought was number 69 off the newsagent's rack. But I'm buying all these back issue Ditkos, right? And I could tell there's a lot happened between that and that, and then then just try to plug the gaps as you go. So and then drawing up the continuity. So so all that good stuff from the 60s was just sort of just shaped my sensibilities.
Yeah. No, my dad was a massive collector of Spider-Man. That was his as well. So very early on in my childhood, I grew up with like your Ditko Spider-Mans and your John Romita Jr. I probably think that John Romita Jr. was senior, was the first like artist that I did look at as a little boy and just was like, wow, that dude's, man, he's good, and my sensibilities sort of started with that too. But I did love Spider-Man. Did you have like any of your folks or family like your comic books as well, or were you sort of?
No, I've got no brothers or sisters, so it's just me. So and I think my mother regretted sort of like once I'd been bitten by the bug. It's sort of like, and there was no going back. I think she'd go, oh, why did I buy him that comic? So
man, I think my mum was like that too, because I was an only child growing up, and it was very much for me like that as well. It was once I started having time, and reading Dad's comic books and veering out, and you'd go out shopping and you'd pester, Mum or Dad, and you'd go and get some others and things like that. In the end, I think they were like, "Oh my God, we're spending more on comic books than we are putting this kid through school."
Unfortunately, when I was a kid, you could then get deposits for soft drink bottles, right? You get 5 cents back. So I would scour the surrounding streets for discarded bottles and take them back, get the money. That would promptly go onto the book exchange on the next trip. So so it was a great dismay when they cancelled deposits for around Australia, with the exception of South Australia. So,
so what happened then? Like, did you because kids have got pretty imaginative minds, David. You'd know that.
Well, I got a certain amount of allowance in my early teens, and then I got a job cleaning up in a butcher shop. when I was in year 10, and that was now I had an income I could actually dedicate to spending stuff.
And that was all comics, wasn't it?
A few records at the time. I had a radio which sort of kept me plugged into that. So, and I was buying books as well. So at that stage, I think I heard you mention a couple of, because you were into fantasy when you were younger. Because I was buying reprints of Robert E. Howard's Conan and Michael Moorcock's Elric and the rest of his Eternal Champion saga and Fritz Leiber's Fafford and the Grey Mouser and all that sort of stuff. I know a lot of that's still in print, but the editions that I read are really hard to come by now. So I think I used to be mesmerized by a lot of them too because of the covers as well. There's something beautiful. Hello, Absinthe. How you doing? There's Ben. Hey, gentlemen, have a great night. Thank you, Ben. Champion. Peter Lane. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for watching. Shawnee. Forgot the time. Hello, and you caught up with us, so all is good. No need for apologies. Jeffrey, how are you? Good to see you back. And Peter, the unpredictable nature of the comics section in your local newsagents. That's right. You could have like runs of comics, and then all of a sudden they're just gone.
I know, and you'd be filthy. You'd be like, "What's going on here, man?" But then you'd get some gems. Hey, like. Weird we're talking about this because it's like I've sort of like I don't know, before Tuesday Chinwags and stuff, like my mind really just sort of wanders, and I had this weird like came out of nowhere sort of moment today that back in the early 90s and I was heavy into like the Uncanny X-Men and like the whole X world because I like the depth of that too, like sometimes I found the comics were a little bit poppy and, like when you're reading fantasy novels and, they're detailed and worlds building and stuff, like X-Men seem to appeal to me for that, with the depth of character. But I randomly came across Batman versus Predator. And I remember at the time, and I was like, what? Like thinking that. So I picked that up because that was one of those occasions where nothing new was on the shelf because I used to.
That would have to be a Dark Horse book.
It was a Dark Horse DC. Like they've done an amalgamation on these two characters. I'd never heard of it because obviously there was no internet back at that stage, and things like Wizard and Hero magazine were really expensive. And I was frequenting newsagents that often, David, that I would walk in the shop and they would basically say, nothing new in today, Leigh. And I'd turn around and walk out. So this one day I found Batman versus Predator. And that, I think that was one of those moments where I was like, wow, okay, no worries. But I'd still love that comic book. And I just had that memory of that today. Those three comic books, actually. I don't even think they're in print anymore. I don't even think you get a trade for some reason. But, that was a time where I was like, wow, because it's like Batman was dark, but that comic book's dark, like because he's fighting Predator and stuff. And, it's just cool. But, the memories that come back, man, on a Tuesday for, when you – sort of because I'm getting into the rhythm and groove, G'day, mate, Spedsy, how are you, brother? Good man, just good memories, So when you came out of like, I guess there comes to a time like you mentioned a tick ago, because I would say already from talking to you for this little bit and reading those books that you've published, which we'll get into later, the stories that you choose are very eclectic. Like they are, each book is different. There's a theme with some of them in a noirish sort of sense, that you've obviously gravitated to. But some of the stories are, there's one, and you think that's what you're going to get. And then there's the next one, and it's like, oh, like that's totally different, like from book to book, which I like. So I'm assuming you didn't always stick with Marvel, and you probably kept your rhythm with your Spider-Man and your favorites. But What?
Yes, it was a. I think around in the early 70s that my friend who was collecting along with myself, we broke the taboo of buying DC because Neil Adams was going mad on Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And how could you walk away from those books? So because
Yeah.
they were just a knockout. So once we'd crossed that barrier, well, that means it was sort of open slather.
Yeah.
So, but then there was, around about 73, I had a fortuitous meeting I met Greg Gates in a Frankston Book Exchange, another one, because my father was working then for Myers down at Frankston Bayside. So I occasionally go down with him and just to hang out and look and see what else. There's a couple of book exchanges. So I was looking through secondhand comics in one, and there was a slightly older guy there, and he could tell from the way I was looking at back issues, this young guy's a collector. So he saw me pause over a Barry Smith Conan, and he said to me, "Oh, do you like Barry Smith?" So that was it. So and Greg being 2 or 3 years older than me, but a much longer collector, because he at that stage he'd been collecting for a few 3 or 4 or 5 years more than I had. And his tastes were far broader. So so he had a copy of you would call it a softcore porno mag now, but it was called We, but it had a 3-page colour Barry Smith strip in it, and which I was oblivious about, because you're not going to read that in your comics news, or on Stan's soapbox. So
opened up doors, that one.
So as I got to know Greg over the next 2 or 3 weeks, he introduced me to Richard Corbin's Ralph from Ripoff Press, and Creepy, which had a colour section, and all the Spanish artists and Richard Corbin doing colour sections. And just right at that time, Bernie Wrightson had just left DC from Swamp Thing, and he just started to do that collection of about 8 stories for Warren, and they were just like, whoa, that was it. There was no going back. He showed me a book called French graphic novel by a guy called Philippe Drouillet, and who I've heard described somewhat unfairly as the French's answer to Jack Kirby on mescaline. So that's a bit unkind, but because he doesn't really take any stylistic similarities from Kirby, but he is epic in scale, which is the one thing he has in common. So there's that. Just looking at all this stuff, I realized, whoa, there's so much more than just superhero comics out there. There's tons of stuff out there. So and that really started to reshape my sensibility to what's out there and what you could expect and what you could look for.
Yeah, no, man, there is so much. Hey, but you came along at you got boom at exact primed at exactly like an amazing moment. You know what I mean? Like when you were like ready to rock and roll and like falling in love with the medium, and then it just sort of took you off into this whole new direction. Because it's if I suppose to a certain extent, like even if people, meet me, and I've said this on the show before, like that, I don't really tell everyone I draw, but when I do, they're always like, oh, I like Superman and Batman sort of stuff. And it's like, like that's cool, like, because it's an easy way to introduce, but if they're people that I eventually get to know quite well and things like that, like I do, I've been known to lose comic books because I like to give people things that they may not have ever thought was a comic book. You know what I mean? And quite often they come back and they're like, "Man, I didn't know like comic books did this." Then it's like, yeah, they do. Like perfect medium, man. It's but I know what you mean about finding things that that like totally like blow your mind, mate. Like in terms of comics, that for me, 2000 AD was one for me when I was young, because I'd never seen. I'd come from superhero stuff and Marvel and DC, and that was mainly most things on the newsagent stand, and because we didn't have a comic shop for a long time in Townsville. And then 2000 AD started appearing, and I was picking them up for relatively cheap, and I was really relishing that, because there's a huge difference between Marvel and DC and what those English dudes were doing, and their stories, and that introduced me to anthologies. I'd never seen an anthology before, and then there's that whole tricky buggers, hey, with you and your anthologies. It's like you get hooked on a story, and you got to go back and get it for the next like 6 or 7 issues, because you got to see the end of it and things like that, But man, beautiful world, man. Like when because I know you've published a lot of Greg's stuff, and we'll talk about because I'd heard of Greg, but I wasn't aware of any of his work. It's not from, again, not being aware, but some things just don't come to me, or I haven't come across them, in those moments. And as we said before the show, which again we'll touch on when we get to your publishing, I was really like taken aback by his artwork in that Tide of Dreams. Like that was, that taught me some stuff, man.
In some ways, it's very traditionalist sort of work, but he's got such a feeling for classic old time comics and drawing and inking. I suppose you say along more traditional lines, but he can create moods with all of that. Back when I did reprinted Tattoo Man's Tide of Dreams, that's because a lot of Greg's stuff had been out of print for 10 years then, and around about year 2000, and because he was a regular contributor to Ink Spots and Fox Comics for their durations, but then after that it tailed off a bit in terms of regular appearances. So I thought, well, round about 2000, well, there's all this stuff here. No one can get access to it now because it's all out of print. Because there wasn't a massive inventory of back issues for Fox Comics because of the way we did it. I know. Can I go down a sidebar here for a minute?
Absolutely.
A lot of people have put out books and got them distributed to newsstand distribution, right? In the hope that they're going to sell enough to warrant the investment of going that direction. And watching Colin, Greg, and Phil do Ink Spots, and the first two were nice and thick, and they did newsstand distribution, and they weren't taken to the cleanest, but they did not. Both books were ran at a loss because, in a sense, it's easy in hindsight. You can say you've got a niche book with a mass market distribution system. So really, the only way you're going to succeed at all is if you do a mass market product, which it's got to be, dare I say, dumbed down enough to get a lot of people to buy it. And if it's sufficiently niche and idiosyncratic, you're not going to get big numbers. And they try to counter that a little bit with issues 3 and 4 because they were slimmed down, and they pull back the production costs in the hope that they weren't going to lose so much, in a sense. But even so, after 4 issues, they decided, it wasn't a mug's game, but we've done the experiment now, and now it was time to move on to different equations in terms of publishing. I know Colin, from when Ink Spots folded, Colin wanted to do a commercial comic book and distributed through American distributors, and his answer to that was getting Phil Barlow to do Zooniverse, which didn't do massively big guns, but it did okay. It broke even. So and then with the gap in local publishing because Xbox had folded, Dave Vodka decided he felt that there needed to be a publication to fill that gap, but he didn't necessarily he wanted to start very small and let it grow into something a bit more organic. Yep. So that's when Foxcross Comics started up in 1983. But around that same time, Gary Dallas started Reverie, the first incarnation of Reverie, which I would see. Okay, we ran copies in the shop, but I also would see it occasionally on newsagent stands. But when I just got to the point where he's been doing this for a small while, with about I think it was issue 7, it disappeared. I couldn't see it anymore. Right, so I assumed that it had stopped coming out. So, but I hadn't heard any. Then it took quite a while before Gary re-emerged on the scene. So
I think like the one thing that I'm learning is like back in that period of time, like from talking to Gary, it was like buying a printing thing from at his house, and he removed the wall, if memory serves me correctly, in his garage. He put the printer in there, and like there was a whole heap of like story going on with that. But like I think the reason why I've got as a fan of like comic books, particularly Australian, all comic books, but I mean my interest is vested in Australian comic books and independent comic books. It's just something I love and something I'm part of. All of you trailblazers, man, like was just based on pure passion and a desire, mate, because it's like you couldn't just go to a printer now and print 50 copies, you know what I mean, like, or rattle off 25 copies to go to the comic book convention and have things as you needed them. Like you had to take such a risk, printing sometimes thousands of comic books, man, on just a chance, you know what I mean? And unbelievable.
In the early days of Fox, Dave Vodka said having watched Greg, Colin and Phil from afar do ink spots, he goes, well, I'm not going to go the newsagent route because that way lies madness. So we're going to do your dough. So he started off with very small print runs from black and white on an A5 photocopier from his father's law firm.
So he was doing minis, basically
basically A5, 24 pages plus covers, A5, black and white, but he wanted to get it out with a reasonable amount of frequency. Like he started trying to get it out monthly, right? Yeah. So for the first, I think 6 or 7 months, he was doing it monthly. And when you're doing it with that frequency, and he started off with a bunch of stuff that was sitting around on shelves and things. And around about the 3rd or 4th, 5th issue, it's starting to coalesce into something because he had Martin Trengove, who did Roscoe the Dog, and Phil Bentley, who joined on as their assistant editors. So then you start applying certain sorts of sensibilities to what you're putting in the book, and then it's starting to shape its own identity. So, and because we're starting off with low, he's just doing enough to cover getting rid of them. They're incrementally going up over time, and they're also being sold Minotaur books because Dave and I were working in there on weekends, and during the week I got when it got up to about issue 11 or 12, it was getting not cost effective to do photocopies anymore. We were on the cusp of doing it offset. So Greg was working at a place called the Swinburne Shooter Union Media Office, and he was running a 2-colour print press there for the union. And they lost the finished artist there, so in the studio. So I got that job. So now I'm working in a camera room with bromides and that. So we're doing the artwork, pasting it up and everything from making bromides from original artwork. Greg's making the plates and printing them. were getting it bound. That was the one external cost, and then would go back to the shop to get sold.
Yeah.
So we're controlling the process all the way along.
Yeah.
That by the time the deal with Fantagraphics was done, around about issue 24, we were printing just under 1,000 copies of Fox Comics for local distribution, not through newsagents, just sold through the shop. There was a little distribution we called Manic Exposer, which used to sell north of the river, north of the Yarra, on Fitzroy and record shops around there. And the rest we'd sell. And there used to be another comics distributor called Styx in Canada, right? We didn't go through Diamond. And so between the three, those three outlets, we were getting rid of almost 1,000 copies, not quite 1,000 per issue.
That's pretty good. Like, that's pretty good.
It took a number of years to do that, but yeah,
man. Like, one thing that's amazing is, like, you know, the amount of issues that you got through. The other thing that I love is hearing stories of how hands-on and the mini comics. You know, like I so admire people that do mini comics, man, because it's like one thing that you know, sometimes if you want to get a comic book out, man, you know, like, g'day Danny Nolan, how you going, brother? It's so good to just mini comics, man. You know, like in today's modern age, if you can't afford printing and that, get them out, do them. You know, like there's amazing minis out there, man. Ryan Ballard does them, Neil Blandon does them, you know, and many, many more. And they're beautiful. Nick May's another one. You know, like, and as you said, that in their control, it's what they can do, and they can do it at a cost-effective fashion to an extent, like, you know, Office Works or Work or whatever like that. But so you sort of never really, man, from the sound of it, had an opportunity not to go on any other road than comic books, because it's like young age, you know, like you just bang, like this is what I want, you know. Mum and dad, like, I'm making this up because I like telling stories, but they probably had to go out and get 6 extra jobs to, you know, like to accommodate your your comic book collecting until you got your job at the butcher shop, you know. And then you took it over from there, and then you meet Greg Gates, and he like sends you off on this whole, wow, there's so much more out there.
Look, in hindsight, it was a life-changing meeting, you know, because you know, your life's going along that way, then it turns, it goes along that way. And Greg's best friend at the time was a guy called Phil Bentley, right? So yeah, I know you've encountered that name a few times. A few interviews. So they also started Minotaur Books with a third friend. It was a mail order service, and then they leapt to a storefront. So, and that was when they had the store and it was doing well. That's why they were going to use the storefront to subsidize printing ink spots. That was going to bankroll it. So
I see. And that's a nice piece of history there, isn't it? You know, it's and you're like and you're in there learning, man. You're like with these dudes, and you're talking, working with them, you're printing, and you're watching the art and ink spots happening, and like everything, I guess, though, like you like everyone learnt from ink spots and stuff, and like had to go back and, I suppose, adapt to a certain extent their business, you know, like plans and stuff like that of what they wanted to do and things, you know, as everyone has to do from time to time.
Yeah, look, eventually I think they'd done the experiment, and they could see that the tail wasn't going to wag the dog, in the sense that the business became more important than the publishing, because they'd sunk a bit of money into it and hadn't got they've got a lot of aesthetic and artistic success that wasn't a great monetary return. So, and that was because they made assumptions about newsstand distribution, newsagent distribution, and I, to this day, I'm leery of it, because unless you've got a mass market product that's even though newsagents now are not a shadow of their former selves, you know, now they're just like on the verge. All they are exist to sell Tesla tickets, really. Newsagents,
pretty much
morning paper. That's it.
Yeah, and a $3.50 can of Coke. If you should so wish it. Yeah, I know. It's a shame, but it is what it is. Like it's So essentially, really, if you've diverged from that road, like, and you're still, like managing to, I guess, push out 1,000, copies of these comic books regularly. So you're distributing it yourself through sticks, as you said, and at local like record stores and anywhere that would accept
and
it.
through
So
miniature books
you're
itself.
out,
So
you're out. You're
we
beating feet, mate. Pushing it out there and stuff.
So then the deal with Fantagraphics came up. Now Fantagraphics, I'm not sure how much you bought independent stuff around about that time in the late 80s. So Groth and Thompson's Fantagraphics were doing their own. They did Love and Rockets and a whole bunch of other things, which were alternative in indie comics. Hate, 8-Ball. One of the coups that Dave Vodicka managed to do was he got a cover out of Damn Clothes before he was famous. That graces the cover of Fox Comics 14. Because he'd done this book called Lloyd Llewellyn for Fantagraphics, and it sort of did okay. But when he started to do 8-Ball, that was it. And now he does comics for the New Yorker and God knows what else. Now he's a well-established cartoonist. So that was fun to do that sort of stuff, and to have Phil had a friendship with Eddie Campbell because there was a chap in England called Phil Gravett, and he published a magazine called Escape Magazine. Now it was a mixture of English comic artists and sort of news and music and stuff like that. Not light years away from Face magazine, for those who are old enough to remember the Face.
I remember that.
So, and there were markets called the fast fiction markets where people used to sell their A5 comics, and that's where Eddie and a whole bunch of people who were doing things for Escape sort of met each other. And because Phil had corresponded with some of these people, we started to get work from them for Fox Comics. So, which was added another new flavour to it. All the stuff is sort of like, if it wasn't weird and whimsical, it was autobiographical or biographical. So, slice of life comics, which is what we were attracted to, because that's what we were reading in the stuff, other people's stuff that we liked. So
I saw a lot of I was also enjoying this yesterday very much, and as I was looking through this book, which I highly recommend to anyone, I could see things like going through Dave's artwork and stuff. I was like, man, there's some Eddie Campbell in that, you know what I mean? Like, and it's weird that you mentioned him, because I like it. There you go, like, so it's all sort of like interconnected and things. But I was enjoying that as well, and I liked the slice of life, and I liked the fact that, I don't know Dave. We can talk about him and how you get like publishing and stuff later, but I noticed that he seemed to, I guess, tell his life through his stories, like as a detective, or like he seemed to do is that a slice of life where you portray yourself as another character? But
I won't say Dave writes here when he does sort of, because he writes autobiographical stuff as well, and that was one collection I didn't send up called Still Truly Confused, because he did a strip called True Confusions for he did a whole bunch of strips for Fox Comics, but that was one of them, right? Which was basically autobiographical stories, and he's got a self-deprecating sense of humor with lots of charm. So he won't hesitate to take the piss out of himself if it's going to get a laugh. So,
yeah.
Like I think there's in last chance showcase, there's death threats from the toast. That's really just True Confusions under another name. So, and Walking Wounded, well, that was his band at the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, right. That's cool, man. Like, because I really enjoyed it, mate. Like, I really the detective one, Blue Detective, would crack me up a couple of times there too, man. Because it's like, as I was reading through that, I was thinking, I wonder if these are like just little thoughts that he's had, and he's gone home and he's quickly, done a 1-page, like story to it at that moment to,
Blue Detective actually became a single. They actually recorded his band Walking Wounded did a bunch of recordings. They recorded a song called Blue Detective. When Fantagraphics put out a collection called Dave Hodson's Walking Wounded, they put a blue flexi disc bounded into the saddle stitching that you could actually have to cut it out and put it on your old-fashioned turntable to play it.
Yeah, that's cool as like. Man, they don't do things like that anymore.
No,
like those old music magazines where, like you were saying, Face, and there was Select, and a lot of those magazines, and like there was even Mojo back in the early 90s and stuff like that. And you'd hear about a new band, you'd read about them, but you'd be like, oh man, I got to import this. You're like 14, 15. What am I going to do? I want to hear them, because you hear them on Rage or something like that. And then these magazines would come out and they'd have that free disc, like on the sleeve on the front, and have like 20 bands with one song. And it was like, wow, so you'd be madly buying it. Like, I love knacks like that. I think there's a certain sadness to me that people sort of don't get to I guess get that pleasure, like experiencing that sort of excitement, going out and getting those little extras, like that did so much. I admire the promoting. It's with now when you went to Fantagraphics, so like Fox had been going for, you said 24 issues,
23 issues.
23 issues. And what brought the Fantagraphics thing into like shape, man? How did that all come together?
We in Melbourne, we become a big fish in a small pond, right? And we thought, what can we do to get bigger? So David met Gary Groth a few times, and so he rang up and proposed an idea that it would Fantagraphics take Fox Comics on, and then because they were publishing similar sorts of books, similar sorts of material, and they would get first cut of whatever money it made to pay for because they're going to foot the printing costs, right? So we would do all the finished art and all the editorial process and the finished art and package it all up and send it to them, right? So they didn't have to do any of that. All they had to do was make plates and run the book and distribute it themselves. And we thought, somewhat naively, I guess we thought, as it turned out, that Groth and Thompson would put as much effort into selling our book as they did their own books. And they simply didn't, not because they were mean-spirited or malicious or anything, they just didn't have the time. So we went from being a big fish in a small pond to minnows in a bloody big pond.
But learning along the way,
we did a Fox Comics special through. That was the first issue that we printed to introduce Fox to, I guess, people who were buying Fantagraphics books and other books through Diamond Distribution. And then we did issues 24, 25, 26 and 27, and by 27 Groth and Thompson basically pulled the plug because we're not making it, we're losing more money than we want to now, right? So then after issue, I think it was after issue 26, and at that stage 26 was my last issue. I'd moved to Sydney for a job. And they said, Phil and Dave and a couple of others said, "Well, do we want to go on?" They asked, "Do you want to go on, or should we leave it? If we keep going back, we'll have to go back to what were a smaller version of what we were." So, and the consensus was let it go. And I think also people say it's about the creative life of a publication or sometimes a band or something. It's about 7 years, and it's been about 7 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and people were getting into relationships, and some people, the children will come along, and other people committing to full-time jobs. So it was sort of time, I guess. And Dave kept the imprint going and did some solo books through Fantagraphics for a couple of years. But when I think after the last one, which was the last book, was Ian Eddy's Unauthorized Biographies series, and they did 2 issues, and there was going to be a third one, and they couldn't do it, and that was the last thing that came out with a Fox Comics logo on it. But it's interesting because right when that was happening, which was about 91, 92, and things were starting to wind down in Melbourne, right? There wasn't so much a scene. There was still a scene, but it was that generation of people who had gone through the 80s were starting to disperse. But what was happening in Sydney, Platinum Grit, Greener Pastures, Hairbutt the Hippo, Zero Assassin, all these things started popping up, almost unbidden. And I thought, and that there was like an energy shift. That's where the next wave of people were coming from.
Yep. Was that timely for you when you got that job? You were mentioning you moved to Sydney at that stage.
I've been working
as a weird synchronistic thing that suddenly David's got to go?
Working as a finished artist for a number of years before then, and living in share houses and since the early 80s and things like that. And I wanted to change of pace, and comics themselves were also a lot of my favorite comic books and were winding up, and as well as bands I've been following for years were finishing their careers and breaking up, and it seemed to be the time to do something different, right? So I was in Sydney for about 7 months, and I'd negotiated this job and gone for an interview before I left. So when I went up there, I had a job straight to go to. And there was a few question marks over the guy I was working for. I would best describe him as the Gordon Ramsay of finished art. Because, and I mean the Gordon Ramsay, not the sort of soft and cuddly one you see now. When he first appeared on TV and he was sort of yelling and abusing his workers in restaurants, that guy. I was there for about 7 months. So the choice was either, and that was just bringing me up to the recession we had to have in the early 90s. So my somewhat naive plans were to quit that job, retreat to Melbourne, wait out till things got better, and then go back to Sydney. That never quite happened. So the reason I quit the job, because I thought, if I don't quit the job, I'm going to hit this guy over the head with a chair because he was such an arsehole. Excuse my French. I was just amazed that he was still walking around. No one had actually given him a hiding, So, so anyway, so that I found myself back in Melbourne in April 91. That's was April 91. Yeah, April 91. The recession was just about to bite. So that stuck me, and I was back in the family home after having moved out like 12 years beforehand. So
That certainly would. That was a fair journey. G'day, Dave Dye. How are you, mate? Legend. That's a fair journey. Like it's you've gone for that new move, and like all that because it when you do look at it that way, Melbourne was humming at that stage.
Yeah.
And then you're right, there was, just from talking to people, I don't think it had just been not really thought about it in such a succinct manner in which you'd placed it. It did seem to move in the vague times that I know, to Sydney, and Sydney was humming. So I guess in a strange way, you did have the right timing to get
Yeah.
there. It's just that, yeah, like no, I remember that session, being a young fella, and aunts and uncles were moving back into, like grandma's house and stuff like that, you know what I mean, like, because they'd been out traveling and couldn't get jobs and things, and like families were bunkering down, and um, yeah, it was a tricky time, yeah, at that stage. But like, you still reading comics at that stage? Did you go back to Melbourne and catch up?
I'd even stopped buying and reading comics just before I went up. The amount of comics I was buying on a regular basis was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking as things were finishing or being cancelled or things like that. So I think, well, I didn't buy any comics for the 7 months I was in Sydney, but I did visit a few comic shops just to visit these places that I'd heard of but never actually been to. And that was like, Sydney siders will know these, but The Land Beyond, Half a Cow. There's King's Comics, which I know is still there, but there's another place called Comic Kingdom. And there was a place out in Bondi where I live, which was run by a chap called Steve Smith. I can't remember the name. It's like a book exchange. What else? And there was a couple of Phantom Zones around Sydney as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I know Kings are still there, but I don't know about any of the others. I think Half a Cow and The Land Beyond, they're long gone. But they were more alternative comic shops.
Yeah. I remember a lot of the names that you're mentioning there, because when I was buying Australian comic books back in the 90s and stuff like that, a lot of those guys were putting their ads of, like on the back of the Sydney cider guys, like you'd have a Phantom Zone ad or a King's comic book ad, like at that stage. And so they were recognized. And I used to, because I used to try and, when you'd get comic books and you'd see and like particularly in Marvel ones, they used to do those really cool checklists, and they're cool now, like, but at the time when you're a kid, you only used to get like 6 or 7 comic books, and there's like another 24 comic books that you'd want to get. And I used to go to the back of the Australian comic books, man, and ring these comic book places, man, like shops, and ask them if they had it, and ask for mail order, and they'd be like, okay, no worries, where are you? I'm in Townsville. And they'd be like, righto. And I used to remember, man, asking them, how much is this, and this? And they'd go, say, $24.55. And I'd get $24.55, put it in an envelope with a letter. My name is Leigh Chalker. I spoke to so-and-so, like for these comic books, and mail it off. And man, like 2 weeks later, these comic books would turn up, hey, like, so now you just jump on the internet, but like sending money around in envelopes. I don't even know if people still do that, man, with credit cards and stuff like that anymore. But I used to love all that stuff, man. Like tracking things down. It's that's part of like we were saying about the book exchanges and things, man. Like when you had that experience with Greg Gates, is like finding those things that like really, it's I think that's the other reason why I love Australian comic books so much at like particularly this moment in my life, man. I don't read a lot of the big guys because I'm constantly blown out, man, by the creative depth of creators in Australia, like, and like it's just everyone. We're all here, but everyone's telling their own story, and because there's an independence to it, there's no there's no major company like cracking whips and paying your bills, and people are doing these things for themselves. You get such a diverse range of stories, and I think it's flourishing, man. I find it really vibrant, man. Um, like one minute you can get a noir, and the next minute you can get slice of life, and then like you can get a superhero comic, or you can get like all these things. Like
Yeah.
it's very very cool, man. It's a creative garden to a certain extent. A lot of freedom, but you're probably right about um, there's not a lot of money in it.
Well, you, I think what I was thinking about, one of your questions was the why.
Mm,
Why would you do this? Why would you
mm,
devote a lot of time?
mm,
And while back in the 80s and 90s, it was more like, well, yeah, I didn't really expect to make a living from comics because you couldn't really, right?
mm,
So you did it for the aesthetic and artistic enjoyment, and for the glory, I guess, right?
yeah.
Uh, that's do I still do that for the same reasons now? I guess I've got a far more realistic expectation when it comes to glory. Uh, but I still, what's the word? I find the publishing and producing of comic books or graphic stories, whatever euphemism you care to use, is in and of itself life affirming, right? That's all the reason you need. I don't expect to sell 1 million with paper tableau. I never set out to do that. It was to satisfy a desire and an urge, almost one that I thought I'd lost at one point, because between 2007 and 2019, I didn't publish anything. I stopped. And by the time, and that's because by that stage, I'm married with 4 kids, right? Well, I got 2 kids back in 2007 and 2 more came along. So, and the last couple of things I published in the first wave didn't pique many people's interest, and they weren't selling. I think I did an Armageddon and a Supernova back in the day with on the table, sharing a table, and they didn't really sell much. So I thought it was, okay, well, maybe it's time to let it go, because at that stage, when you're looking after 4 kids, or helping look after 4 kids, you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah.
People may dispute me on this, and that, by all means, please, because I know some people can actually do both halves of this equation, but I think, as George Bernard Shaw said, the pram in the hallway is the enemy of art.
It's probably true, man.
So I'd helped a few people out with the odd project here and there, but I wasn't really doing anything myself. And I remember when I was approaching my 60th birthday, which is a few years ago, and I was miserable because the daily life was just grinding me down, been slowly grinding me down for a number of years. But it was, what was making me miserable was basically because I hadn't been doing anything creative for quite a while, and I sort of pushed all of that to the back of my mind. But it will take a toll of you. You suppress it, it will take a toll on you over time. And late 2019, Dave Hodson rang me up, and we'd been out of contact for a number of years. So we were just sitting around and, shooting the breeze and talking about this, that, and the other, and just having a joke about one thing and another. And I said, we should do something just for the fun of it, to stop our minds from atrophying. And he'd been doing this. He'd been sitting up in the Adelaide Hills doing this story called Anyhow Town. and there was a more than 10 years ago, there was an anthology run out of Adelaide called Fistful of Comics by a guy called Lucas House, a young guy. And David had a few episodes of Anyhow Town published in that, along with a bunch of other people. And Lucas House was very ambitious and perhaps somewhat naive, but he decided we should get everything you've done up to this point and just put it in a graphic novel, right? And they're like, oh, yeah, really? Are you sure? Okay. So, but because they didn't have an ending, right? So so they ran what he had, which was about 80 odd pages, and it just stopped. And he did a 1-page coda trying to mitigate that. And I said, and I remember saying, how did it go? And he goes, it raised nary a ripple, sunk without trace. So anyway, so undaunted, Dave just keeps beavering on up in the hills, right? So he's telling me this, and I said, how much of that have you done now? And he goes, 250 pages. And I said, you're joking. And so I said, well, he goes, I don't know. I've been doing it for so long. I don't know. He's lost all objectivity. I don't know whether it's any good or whether it's just rubbish, So he bundles that up and a whole lot of other stuff that I hadn't seen in the interim and sends it to me. This is in November 2019. So it arrives and I've been looking through it and I said, we should do something with this. And just as we've really come to that thought, now it's like February 2020. Bang, COVID's on, right? And, Melbourne has the clamps locked down on it, so at that stage, my computer had been, which was on the verge of hard drive failure 2.5 years earlier, still sitting in its cartons in the garage. I hadn't even unpacked it after the previous move. So I thought, all right, because I said, okay, first things first, we'll reprint a couple of things that are long out of print, which was Tide of Dreams and his book, Truly Confused. So I hauled the computer out, dusted it off, got it set up. It still seemed to want to work. Then I stripped everything off that wasn't necessary for publishing. So just basically it was an operating system, InDesign, Photoshop, Word, and that was it. Nothing else. It wasn't even connected to the internet because it's a boat anchor. It's 40 gig hard drive. Yeah. So and I remember I hadn't done any publishing or I hadn't done any finished artwork for a number of years at that stage. And I opened up something and I started to refamiliarize myself on it. It was a bit of a light bulb moment because I thought, this is what I am. This is who I am, right? And I was less miserable. So when I started putting together things and getting it to print, I felt heaps better. So I would suggest anyone who wants to do it, just do it for that reason alone. Yeah, because I guess when I'm doing this now, I'm 6. I did it when I was 60, so there's a whole bunch of life experience and forces and a whole bunch of stuff operating on me there that may not be operating on a younger person. But I wouldn't hesitate to say to anyone, do what you feel you want to do, right? If it makes you happy, just do it.
Yeah. It's that I know. Like I don't say this like lightly because I had a different experience with COVID being in Townsville because up here in far north Queensland, to a certain extent, life sort of went on as normal. There were the restrictions and the distances and things like that, but Queensland went through that whole like you're not coming in without staying in a hotel, like for 2 weeks. So it was basically locked down, the state, and the state seemed to just, you could go to the shops, you could do this, you had to take your precautions, but life still moved on. So I didn't have the same experience as like you guys in Victoria and Melbourne. I've got friends obviously down there, and when ComX first started, and the drink and draws, and we were all meeting each other for the first time. I remember meeting guys that were discussing about how the lockdown had made them feel, and like they were starting to get down and depressed more and that sort of thing, and like that they lacked the human contact and stuff, which they realized was important. But then at the same time, everyone down there was just working their fingers to the bone, man, like telling stories and pumping work out, and doing things that, like maybe they'd put on the back burner before,
absolutely.
Like it was an awful thing for people and a country, the world to go through. But in terms of like this little niche, like comic book thing, so much, man, like, like it was like revitalized during that period, I think because we're all to a certain extent like introverted, so a lot of us maybe to an extent didn't mind the extended stays at home of just writing and drawing.
Well, that's how I kept busy, is because at one stage we were locked down that hard that we couldn't go 5 kilometers from our homes. We could only go to the local shops and for shopping and back, and I thought, Jesus, I can't even get to the bloody printer. He's in Ringwood, and that was about 7 kilometers away. And I thought, And anyway, so, but all of that time, I think at the end of 2020, I put out Tide of Dreams. That was the reprint. And I still had all these covers from the first print, which were all beautifully offset printed. There was no way I was going to throw them out, because I knew I was going to use them again one day, and sure enough, I did. So, but the technology had improved in probably 20 years for digital technology, and now you can get really beautiful results for not a very big investment, better than what it was 20 years earlier. So there was all I did. I spent 2021 and 2022, or most of 2022, just scanning artwork and putting together books. So by the time we were let out, which was roughly midway through 2023, midway through 2022, they started to ease off the restrictions. So I put out 3 books in 2022, another 3 last year in 2023, and I'm working on the 3rd one now for 2024, because I'm not going to die wondering, mate.
Yeah. It's like, see, there you go. It's like you didn't. I like with like we were talking the other day, and I was saying to you, like, similar feeling for me with how you are with your creativity. I found, and I always talk about it, about like the amazing like healing quality of creativity, man, and through my bad patches and things like that, and sobrieties and battles and things like that, I found that leaning into creativity in particular was hugely healing, and I do enjoy like hearing from other people, but particularly just as you said before, like you just felt after like like I guess raising kids and house and family and wife and all those sorts of things, you get I guess you had that compulsion that you wanted to get back into it, and like with the advent of COVID, like you were able to like, whoa, okay, now I'm feeling good, and then all this stuff has just started like flowing, man, like all these beautiful books.
Because I
do want to show this, David. I do want to show that because I was on the ComX recent reads last night, and if there's anyone watching that hasn't seen that, Tide of Dreams, which is the reprint of a Fox Comics story by Greg Yates and Dave Hodson, called Tattoo Man. Man, highly recommend that story. That story has, I've been thinking about it for 2 days. Just something about it I found quite beautiful. And, you know, I mean, if you hadn't have reprinted that, man, I never would have found that, you know, like to appreciate the magic in that, you know. It's,
Let me.
I hope, because
Did you
one thing, man,
all right,
yeah.
see this? I did this back in 2002, which was a compendium of Greg Gates's stuff up to that point, right?
Oh,
So it was about 104 pages of art, of stories and artwork. Now that's been long out of print. That was the book that, for about 10 years afterwards, people say, "Have you got any? You're ever going to do that again, or are you going to reprint that again?" And so that's the book I'm working on at the moment. I'm waiting for the last dozen pages of artwork, new artwork that Greg's done in the last 20 years. So I've laid out 85% of it. I'm working on the editorial stuff now. I'm just waiting for Greg to supply me the new pages that he's done in the interim to go in it. So if you're watching this, Greg, I haven't forgotten.
Greg. Get them done, Greg. You want to see that book, Greg?
So yeah, look, but that'll
Greg.
That'll be great when it comes out, because I think also Dylan's got a couple of upcoming projects which will also have some artwork by Greg. So it'll be good to see his work out there again, because he's basically living in semi-retirement now. He doesn't stick his head over the parapet very often these days. So
oh mate, it's it's beautiful stuff. Like it's what I like the fact that it's like you are collecting like careers worth of work. It's not like you know, you're not like, someone's not giving you essentially a story they've done in the last 6 months. You know what I mean? Like there's like, you know, 20 or 30 years worth of their work and development going into what you're putting together. You know, it's essentially is like an artist's, like, I don't know what you call it.
The newer stuff is
respective.
That's Anyhow Town Volume 1.
It's
about 90 pages. So, and early this year I put out Volume 2, which is about 120 pages. So that's, but I didn't send that up to you because I thought you needed to have to come in on other things to to familiarize yourself. So, so that's newer work.
Where do you, like, we had this conversation last night. I was asked during the review show, like, where can people go to find these books? And I'll always ask at the end of the show. But while we're talking about it, you're whipping up this magic, man, you know, like, where would people go to get these books?
PM me on my Facebook page.
There you go.
When I was on my Facebook page, I'm a member of Daniel Best's page, which is history of Australian comics from so and so up to 2010 or whatever the date he's got on it. Or no, you can go to my Facebook page too and PM me through that, just directly there. Am I going to have a website? Yes, I am. I'm currently in discussions with someone to build me one. So that's I've ummed and ahed and thought about it and looked at templates and for quite a long time, and I thought I'll rather let someone who is totally familiar with walking around that area to make one for me. So I'm probably going to be the worst client because I'm an old grapho and an old typographer, and I thought, God, and so there's probably not going to be too many boundaries for free expression of creativity, because I'll be saying, can you do this and this and this and this and this and this? But anyway, look, so that's eventually, I hope by the end of this calendar year, to have some sort of website up. So,
that's cool, man, because the question, like, it just got me last night. I thought I didn't even think to ask David, like, you know, where it was available, because I mean, man, like, I thoroughly I don't, man, I love them. Like, there's another one here, like, while we're talking, like, about this stuff, because I do want to give this all a plug as well. And when you were talking about the old music magazines, you know, like having comic books and articles and different bits and pieces in them, would be I guess a similar, like Feet of Clay had that
Right.
sort of vibe to it. I felt when you mentioned it before, you've got like narrative stuff with, imagery like that, but then at the same time, here come your, like your comic books and, your cartooning and that sort of a vibe. But then you had like these photorealistic type things in it, like as well. Like that was a good read. And the other one I liked, which has got some dark stuff in it, was this Blue Smoke. That's
Look,
got some short stories that when I read that, I was like, woo, Nick May, get that website up and running. Nick May, I agree. Nick May cracking that whip.
so that's I'm a big watcher of film noir movies from the 40s
Yeah.
and 50s, and
Yeah.
also I've read Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and a few others, and
Yeah.
I like the visceral nature of some of the interactions in those stories, right?
Yeah.
So one of my big favourite reads, and I read it when I came back from Sydney, because I said to Greg, I'd looked at the comic for over a year, over 7 months, and I said to Greg, what's new? And he said, oh, a whole bunch of stuff. He goes, there's this and this and this, and maybe this, you'll like this, which was David Lapham's Stray Bullets, if you've ever read any of those.
Uh-huh.
Just the best.
That's a good one to get, like coming off a break, like, and then whoop, there you go.
And let me say, with a lot of people who do both the writing and the art, the two categories of them. So you've got artists who write, and you've got writers who draw. And he definitely falls into the latter. He's a writer who draws.
Yeah.
And he there's none of that. The artwork does not exist to indulge the ego of the artist. The art is there to tell the story in a disciplined, economical way, and more power to him. So
I would agree with that.
I'm betraying some of my prejudices there. So
no. Like it's a man.
Look,
like,
I love beautiful artwork as much as the next person, right? But there's so much sloppy. I'm far less forgiving for sloppy storytelling or just superficial writing. I'd rather buy something that's well written that maybe the art's not very good, because I see, the germ of something really interesting happens, starting to flower, right? There's a lot of books out there with really nice artwork, but the story is relatively superficial, and they just don't look, at my age, they just don't engage me. I'd rather read something which engages my emotions.
I completely understand that. Is that coming from, because with being publishing, you're also editing and stuff like that, is that that's purely from you now as emotionally what you want to read, or is there a hint of that, like the David Bird publishing editor in that as well?
Yes, to both, in a sense. If in terms of publishing, the first law of publishing is you better be damn well happy with what you're doing, because nobody else may be, so you better be happy with it, right? Don't I know some people maybe will do a book or publish a book with one eye on the market, where they think it's going to go, and sometimes they'll be right, but unless you really, I think, believe in what you're writing and what you're drawing, and it comes from the heart or the guts, right? It won't have that. Needs to have that sort of authority, that authenticity, for a much abused word, but it's still true. So I think if you play at something and it's not really your forte, you can see it or feel it in the writing, depending on the facility of the writer.
No, I see that. Man, I agree with you with that. It's you gotta. It's like I don't necessarily like just as my perspective. For me, from me and my experiences, limited in comparison to yours and stuff. I have more when I'm doing Battle for Bustle, and these are my characters that I've created over, my whole life, really. I feel very much at home with that, and I feel like that's the best work I can give. When I'm doing other people's characters and things like that, it's sometimes I've gone against myself. Like I've decided at one point, no, I don't think I can give that the best, but then I decided, no, I'll try, and nothing wrong with trying. But then I've looked back on the work and I've thought to myself, like I should have just politely said no and kept in my lane, if you know what I mean.
Look,
that's
when I was reading Battle for Bustle,
Hmm.
it was a very intense read, and it really struck me that because it was such an intense read, I thought, wow, I can't really believe Leigh has done this, because he's such a laid back, affable sort of chap, in Tuesday Chinwags. And I thought, and I wouldn't have picked you based on the little bit of exposure I've had, that you would be able to write a book that intense. And it's got no book is perfect, but it's got a certain something. I haven't put my finger on it yet. I think it's the passion you have for doing the project that I can feel when I read it. So that's what I'm responding to. So, which I like. It's either that makes me overlook any potential flaws or shortcomings or anything like that, because I can feel something coming through the work.
Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you.
Right.
Because I certainly do give it a lot, man. It's much like a lot of creative endeavors that I'm sure you would have experienced and others have. It's a lot of life has gone into that. Many experiences, both positive and negative, and I've had the ability to have that as my creative release. So at different times in my life, like there's lots of things that are probably intense with it, but then at other times in my life where I've gone back to look at it, there's a little lightening, and the emphasis is on how I feel. So in a strange way, it's sort of been a diary, mate, of a lot of my life. So, but man, I'm very touched. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for the kind words, and I appreciate it.
I'm not just saying to curry favour, but because that's what my feelings when I was reading it. So
that's brilliant. Like that's exactly how I hope you were going to feel when you read it, man. That's like you said. This is Battle for Bustle was for me, and I, like you, understand why people do things for market, and when they're doing projects, are hoping to sell, whatever the figure is in their mind, or if they're doing a Kickstarter, they want to get, a certain figure in their mind. I mean, however you come to that conclusion is entirely the individual. But Battle for Bustle for me, and I could see it in the stuff that you're producing as well and publishing, is for the same reason as you said before. It's something that's a compulsion. It's something that I need to do. There's times where I can tell you, I sit here and I wonder why, as we were talking before, but I go away from it for a week or two and think to myself, I've had enough, and then I find myself coming back and realizing like there's just no other thing for me to do, like this is what I've got to do. So that's my motivation, and if people get it and they enjoy it, then that is the greatest thing, that compliment that anyone can give to me. If one copy of it, sells, and that's still a wonderful compliment, because I just being able, each issue has been such a battle, man, that it's a journey, each one. So I'm glad you could see that in the artwork, and greatly appreciate it. The when you got stray bullets and stuff from Greg, and he said this is what you should have a look at, and you took to that. At what stage were you thinking that did that tweak on to another, like you'd finished stray bullets? What's next?
It's roughly now. What time is it? What year is it now? It's
2024.
Oh yeah, no, I'm back then. I'm sort of it was got to about 2000. No, it's 1992. I've been back for a while. Greg was, I think, putting the finishing touches. Might have been 91. Greg was trying to put the finishing touches on Tattoo Man for Fantagraphics, and he goes, do you want to? Do you do the finished art on the cover for me? So I said, sure. So, and I was around there for, I don't know, Greg's place, because he had a deadline to work to. We had a couple of days to do it and send it off. And it was bloody miserable Melbourne weather, cold and wet, not unlike the winter we've just had. And I remember because he wanted to airbrush the blue in the background, and he never used one. And he goes, you've done it, haven't you? I said, yeah. I said, can you do that? I said, yeah. Can you cut all the masks? Yeah. So, all right. We won't make it too, because it was a very slight graded twilight blue. And because of the way it was going to be reproduced, it was going to be wrapped around what was then called a drum scanner and read with a laser. So you couldn't put it on inflexible board, or even board with a bit of a light wobble, because there's no way you could wrap it around a scanning drum. So we were going to do it on bromide paper, because that remained flexible. But then if you put too much paint on bromide paper, it'll crack and fall off. So we mixed the paint, it was gouache with, what we used? It was ox gall, which will allow it to bend and grip the paper and bend as well. So as well as doing the line work was a clear acetate overlay, and Greg was painting on the figures on the reverse of the bromide paper, because you could do a bromide and peel it away, and you could see a faint grey outline, and paint up to that edge, and then when you put the acetate overlay over the top, that would be the holding black lines between figures in the background and the foreground. Because I'm a finished artist as well, so because we understand the printing process, we can adapt to what the end point is going to be when it arrives at Fantagraphics' offices over in the States. So that was, we beavered away for 2 or 3 days, bucketing down rain, freezing in Greg's studio. And then it went off, but it came out all right. It seemed to come out months later. I don't know why. Maybe it was just like I was not aware of it, so much aware of it. So, but that was fun. But getting on to, I had all this stuff to look at while I was there, and borrowed a few of it, and there was some other French stuff he bought, and I really liked some of the artwork, and it was all sort of like enough to sort of fire up the juices, right? Yeah. So there was a book he was helping to do layouts on that a couple of young guys were doing. One was writing it, another one was drawing it. Jason Badow was the person who was drawing it from Greg's layouts, and I think another chap called, I think it's Rod Tokley, who had was inking it. I could be wrong there. And they were stuck for 4 pages up the end, because they hadn't really worked out their page count very very carefully. This is a book called Disciple. They were going to do it newsstand. I think the way to get around the printing costs, they were going to gang print it with 2 or 3 other books and split the printing costs between each of the people who were getting something gang printed. And Greg and I had done a story just for fun called Red Dog, which is one of the stories in Blue Smoke. And that was the 4 pages that got bunged up the back.
Yeah, Disciple was that had like an orange,
a brown sepia and black cover.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that over there, man, in my little portal. So yeah, I remember that. The funny thing is like I very much like to one day see Dave Dyer's portal, because you can mention a comic book to him in passing if he's on a live stream, man, and suddenly he'll just quite literally do this, Dave. There it is. And I don't know what's behind the computer, man, but it's like, it'd be like paradise what he pulls out of there. But yeah, no, I remember that. That's wild, man.
So based on that story, Greg's saying, why don't you write some more? So I thought, okay, yeah. So I wrote 3 more, and then we looked around for who was around now to do any artwork. So there was 3 young guys. One we knew from Fox Comics, who was a friend of Dylan's, and a couple of people that I hadn't met before. And they had their names passed down to Greg from someplace or another. So we contacted them, and they did the pencils and Greg did the inks, and that would become Blue Smoke. So that was feels like 1,000 years ago now. That's why the book's only $2.75. Back in the day, that didn't. Yeah. That's what I was selling it for.
Yeah. And those artists were
Angelo, Malcolm Ritchie, and Michael Nason.
Yeah. Now Michael Nason is he's a gentleman that I've met. He's related to you in a particular way.
He's my brother-in-law.
There you go. And I think from the last time I was talking to him on a Friday night drink and draw about a month ago, and I said to him that you were popping on, and he was like, is it on the 17th? And I'm like, I'll have to check my diary. It's either the 17th or the 24th. And I remember him saying, it can't be the 24th. That's my birthday. So yes, Mike, if you're watching, mate, it's David's here on the 17th. So look, 24th is free.
Michael has been a stalwart of amongst the contributing artists to Paper Tableau over the years. So it's been great. So
yeah. No, that's cool, man. It's I love, like, another one of the things, mate, is that I love about Chinwags and learning about, like, histories and story, like, and the whole, like, landscape of comic books, is how, like, connected everyone is in their own way. You know what I mean? Like, already, like, just, and there's this person here that's suddenly there, and like, we've all, happy birthday, Michael, says Andrew Law artwork. We got a week early, and he's got 2. Like, so there you go. But how interconnected everyone is, man, and how everyone, it really does give me the overall impression, the more people that I meet, is like, there is something strangely compulsive about comic book creating, man. Like, there's something in, like, the blood, mate, doing, like, if you got it, you got it, like, and you're not going to stop for anything, man. It's it's weird. I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's comfort or whether it's just something that, everyone's got their creative juices that they
I think
enjoy.
it's a compulsion, because it depending on whether you write or whether you draw or whether you're a colorist or even a publisher, if you have some sort of creative impulse and you stifle it or deny it, over time it will make its presence felt. Because you're right, and that's why I think people are compelled to keep doing it, even though in the face of monumental monetary evidence to the contrary. You're not going to, very few people make a living from it, right? And if you're going to try to make a living from it, you're not going to do it in Australia. You really have to go overseas and push and push.
Yeah,
and push,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
you've got to hustle
you have to
bad.
have
Yeah.
that fortitude and single-mindedness to do that.
I agree with that. It's like you're not going to make much money, but I think I've been through that period too, mate, where I didn't draw for a long period of time either. I had other things going on, and not a lot of it was, creative. It was more self-destructive at the time, and I found that and looking back on it in hindsight and with plenty of reflection over the last few years, I recognise that if I would have been more creative in those lulled periods, my self-destruction probably wouldn't have been. I don't know if it would have slow. I don't know if it would have stopped. If you know what I mean, it may have slowed, but there would have been some sort of balance. If you know what I'm saying,
Yeah,
because I had that release, instead of not having it there, and I denied myself, and I played a huge. I paid a price for that, and I think one of the things that I've learned over the last few years of sobriety is, sometimes you're not always motivated to do it, like to sit down and do your 8 or 9 hours drawing and things like that, and they're okay to have days like that, or a few days here or there, you get caught up and you're a bit flat, that's okay. But man, I can't go for too long without coming down in here and pulling out the page. You know what I mean? Even sometimes I don't even know what I'm drawing, man. I just go stream of conscious, man, and just start drawing lines, and then just I feel better. It's
my rule of thumb since I came back to publishing was, if I do only 5 minutes a day, I turn the computer on, do a few odds and ends, move something, lay something out, and you may only have enough energy to do 5 minutes, or you've got so many other commitments you've got to deal with. You can do it this little narrow window and then stop. But if you at the end of the week, there's 7 lots of 5 minutes, well, you've got something to show for it. Then let those weeks turn into a month. You've got half a book done.
And you feel good because it's like
you feel good because you're doing something.
Yeah, man. Yeah. No, I've got you. That's why it's like even if for the rest of my life, man, I made no money, and I was just working, doing a job and doing my thing and stuff. As long as I was drawing and I just had that release, like for me personally, it's I can handle things, it's if that also makes sense. But I mean, everyone goes through cycles. I mean, I don't have children, so I don't have the pram in the hallway, you know what I mean? I march to the beat of my own drum, essentially, man. If I feel like drawing, I draw. If I don't feel like drawing, I don't draw. Most of the time I'm here, doing it because that's what I do. So I'm grateful to have had the opportunity where I've been able to, I guess, reconstruct my life to a certain extent and compartmentalize my time so that I can release things. Hence, that's possibly why Battle for Bustle is intense, because I've got to get that out so I can be, happy here, I guess, and peaceful, mate. So it all ties in. But I find too, though, that what you're saying, talking to Andrew Law last week and speaking to Dylan Naylor and varying other people, it comes by too where they, they take their opportunities to create where they can. They were saying they've both said that they'd take their kids to a sport, and they've got 15 minutes to wait in the car. Let them put drawing desks out or the tablet and they're finishing things, put it in the back, go home. So everyone works out their rhythm and what's right for them. It's sometimes
I watched your interview with Dylan running up to tonight, 2 or 3 days ago, and when you asked him what he had coming down the pipeline, right, and he answered that he's recolouring a book of show bags and something else he's got on the book. One thing he didn't mention, and he's posted a few pages of this, he's working on some sort of childhood memoir of growing up and family life and collecting comics and going through high school. And he's posted 3 or 4 pages of it. I am hanging out for that book. That is the one thing I really want to see. So, but he didn't mention it. And I thought, okay, so maybe he just wants to keep it on the boil for a bit. Because I know he's, a couple of times I've quizzed him and he goes, I do a few pages here and there. So, but that's all he said. That's all he says about it. So it's obviously, I continue to be a work in progress, but it looks great with some of the pages that he's posted that I've seen. So
yeah, man, yeah, cool dude.
I first met him when he was a 17-year-old kid coming to a Fox Comics meeting in the middle 80s.
Yeah. See, connected, crazy, eh? It's he got a lot of things on the burn, I guess, but maybe he's just one of those dudes that just focuses on one project and just does a little bit of dabbling on the other.
He keeps his cards close to his chest, so it's incredibly productive.
Yeah, man. I don't think there's anything wrong with keeping your cards close to your chest to a certain extent, because it's like, God, I've been one too where, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I don't do any of them but do something else. So it's like, I'm just, just do chinwag, man. That's what I do, and just draw away in the background, and things come when they come. But man, I really, that's cool. It's like, let's go back to, you did. So you were why paper to blow? What brought you? What was the first thing that you published that you decided after that lull? There was the lull, and you said, because Tide of Dreams is, what was that? 2001.
Blue Smoke's 1999 or 1998. That was the first thing.
Yeah.
Then there was
99. Yep.
Yeah. Then there was Tide of Dreams, which I think is 2000.
Yeah.
Then there was Truly Confused. Let me just grab a copy.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Lovely.
Which was this.
Yep.
Which was Hodson's then strip called True Confusions from the Fox. So there was 40 pages of that. Yes. When I because if you enjoyed last year's showcase, you'll enjoy that. So
yeah.
Now, when I went to reprint,
you're going to cost me a fortune throwing these books up, mate.
When I came to reprint it, we added 20 extra pages that weren't in the first one because Hodson got a few solo books out of the deal with Fantagraphics after the anthology folded, right? Mm. So he got Dave Hodson's Walking Wounded, which was only one issue. It was had he started on the second one, but it got cancelled after one issue. So there was also also Walking Wounded was a special, True Confusions, and he got, because he'd written Tattoo Man with Greg, so that was the third book of his. But there was the second issue of True Confusions that he was going to do. Well, he had all this artwork, but it never went anywhere. And number one's never been reprinted, but it'll be reprinted next year. Don't worry. Yeah. So, so we found that the 20 pages, he finished those and we put them up the back because they sort of pick up almost where the first 40 leave off. So now it's a 60-page book. So, but that's, so that's, that was fun getting both of those back into print. And then, what did we do? Then I did a little sampler called Assorted Hoo-Ha, right? Mm-hmm. Now, someone correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm just an old bugger, right? Hoo-ha is a synonym for rubbish or, trash or something of no consequence. right?
Mhm.
I've heard it's got another meaning, but this is a PG show, so we won't talk about its potential other meaning. And I just thought, no, when someone told me, like, no, it doesn't. But anyway, so that's what it means. A sort of rubbish or a sort of triviality. So, and that's just sort of, that had some stories by Dave and one by Ian Eddy that Dave had written that had only been printed once before for 30 copies and no one had ever seen it. So, and because I was doing a big collection of Ian's lost artwork, which was, like I said, this third book of unauthorized biographies was cancelled. There's two stories to why it was cancelled. That the black and white market was contracting and Fantagraphics decided to finally cut their losses and cut ties with Fox Comics because that was the last book they were doing, and also because it was they were all biographies of dead film stars, right, or people, popular culture figures. Fantagraphics, it's a story I heard from Greg, and I presume this came from Ian, was Fox Fantagraphics did their due diligence on the publication, and they ran it by the estate of Bruce Lee. And they said, if you publish that, we'll sue you. So they did. So that was another reason to drop the title. Now, since we've done the collection, I've quizzed other people about this, and they said, "Have you heard this story?" Because I'm sure Greg told me this story way back in the early 90s. And a couple of people sort of like, yeah, I sort of think that, but Dave Vodicka, who was the publisher, was saying, I don't remember that story. Groth just said they couldn't afford it anymore. So anyway, it's a nice story. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. It could be true. So, and for probably, I'm not sure whether you're aware of it, but when Ian passed at 60, he laid down on the floor of his flat and watched TV. He's watching his Maxwell Smart DVDs, went to sleep, never woke up. When his brothers were cleaning out his flat, and they found 8 issues worth of artwork that was never published for his unauthorized biography series. It was a stack this high of like art boards, right? And they said, and because Ian had fallen out of love with comics the last few years of his life, all his solo work, and there was an enormous inventory of his own work, he destroyed it. Anything he collaborated with other people, he gave those people that artwork. But all his solo stuff, he destroyed it, burned it or destroyed it. I don't know how he got rid of it, but it's gone. It only exists now in whatever publications that it came out in. But all this stuff to do with this book, the last book he did, that was sitting there in a pile at the back of his wardrobe. And his brother says, do you want this? And I didn't even know it existed, right? So I spoke to Lazarus, who was his main collaborator for Fox Comics. I said, are you aware of all this was sitting there? And he goes, no. And Dave Vodicka didn't know about it. So it was like a lost treasure. And I thought to myself, the reason, and I thought, God, it's be so wrong not to collect this, right? And his parents in their let's just say, I assume they're still alive, but they're in their middle 90s, right? They didn't have anything of Ian when Ian had passed. They didn't have any artwork of his or any of his comics or anything like, because he destroyed them all, right? Of his own work, because he got disenchanted with it, and which was a shame because we all loved him, because he was such a talented guy, and we all liked his work. But what can you do? So I decided it was really in a sense for his folks, but also I knew all these a lot of the other Fox contributors. I said, well, this is your last chance to get some of Ian's work. So, and he, I'm only going to print enough to cover all the old Fox contributors and any other interested parties that put their hand up for one. So I've got about 14 left out of about 65. So. So also, but his brothers and his parents obviously got a few, half a dozen copies or so. So they had something. His parents had something of his,
Yeah.
before they got too much older and passed away themselves. I'm sure, given the benefit of the doubt, I'd say they're still there, but they're in a nursing home. So
yeah, it's
I was just staggered,
Man, that would have been like, while eternally sad, that would have been an amazing thing to see, in terms
Yeah.
of after finding out about him, but then just to have this like secret stash of like these pieces of work that he'd done,
And I'm amazed to this day, apart from because Phil and I made up a long list for Fox Comics contributors to get in contact. Do you want one of these? While I hammered down a print run, and pretty much most people said they wanted one. But there are people, once I started selling it, people popped up out of the woodwork that I'd never seen or heard from before. They're only looking at the Facebook page, right? On for the comics group, and I sort of I want one of those. I want one of those.
Yeah.
Who's this guy? There's a chap from Rhode Island, I think, in Providence, Rhode Island, in the States, and he was a collector of Ian Eddie stuff. Right? I thought, how can you even collect all those little minis and stuff like that from over there? How are you getting in contact with them? Right?
Yeah. Oh, he
man. He wanted one. And there's two or three other people just popped up out of the blue that I'd never heard of. And they said, no, I knew Ian. I went into his shop. I'll have one. There you go. It's like throwing out a message in a bottle. You don't know where it's going to end up.
Yeah, oh man, that's the whole thing. That whole story is beautiful because it's like, it's bittersweet to a certain extent, isn't it? Like, because he's passed away disenchanted, like he's, like, I guess, fallen out of love with his artwork, yet left this treasure, and you've taken
goodness.
it upon yourself, mate. And you've taken it upon yourself to produce this work for his family and friends because of your respect for your mate. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, you know what I mean? You've got people from across the other side of the world and people that aren't familiar. I want that. I want this. I want that. It's
I love that because you amazed at how bits of information can stretch through the internet, and sort of like people will ask you stuff that, where's this person from? How do they know? Where do they know me from? Well, they don't. They just want a copy of that. So so that's good. That's the fun of it. That's what really makes it worthwhile for me. So
that's cool, man. That's a really cool story. I'm really happy you're putting all these things together because, like I said to you earlier, for me, I wouldn't be able to track down any of like the original like Fox comics and things like that, man. But and
the reason why they're so hard to get is because we used to print to pre-sold orders. So we would, based on what was the sell-through of the previous issue, we would do that and a few more. And as we slowly increased it, the margin of overs remained the same. Well, we just increased the print run. But that's why there's not a big backlog of inventory back issues, because we didn't, we were doing it on a shoestring. So we weren't going to blow wads of dough.
Oh, well, you wouldn't want like 20 cartons.
Copies,
20 cartons of comics sitting there forever and a day. Like, I totally get that. It's like we were saying before, just that advantage of modern printing against, like the earlier versions of printing. But man, that's like, I love hearing these stories too, man, because just the sheer difficulty of putting it together, like, and doing it, and like what you described, like, that 3 days where you and Greg were like, shacked up in his little studio in like the freezing like Melbourne winter, like doing all like the cuts and like working out color things and And now, like modern technology, they go, oh, you want that color? Tick, click, click, click. Like do all that, with a few things.
Yeah, I know.
And, yeah, see you later. It's out. And like, there's so many lost arts, man. And I don't know whether it's like, I guess
when I was doing my finished art training, I was the last generation that was taught how to do the old style analog posting up of bromides, drawing very thin lines with a repeated graph, cutting things with a scalpel blade, doing overlays on artwork and things like that. Yeah. Because within 2 or 3 years, or it might be about 3 years of me getting out in the industry, computers were arriving in force, right? And layout programs would become sophisticated enough that once I remember Fairfax adopted InDesign for the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, right? Once big industry is adopting those, that's it. Boom, it is here. The old ways are out.
Yeah.
And I knew people who were there's a whole industry of people who were film combiners and dot etchers and plate makers and finished artists that if you didn't retrain, you're gone. Yep. So I retrained because I'd only been in it for a few years, so there was no way I was walking away from it. So yeah.
That's fair enough too. I mean, it's I suppose there's always advances in technology, isn't there? God, we're looking down the barrel of the whole AI revolution at the moment. Like with things happening there, and industries under fire, and everyone concerning themselves like with futures and jobs and things like that too. While I definitely don't agree with AI, like it's just another fundamental change in the industrial landscape, I guess, like to an extent, like you were just discussing with, like traditional printing, and then computers come in and you don't want to see anything change really. But yeah, that AI stuff, man, that's wild.
I've got a gut feeling. I was having a chat to a couple of other people who are artists, and at the moment, like industry, I suspect will attempt to sweep the costs of artists away by using AI, right? Because they just see it as a commodity. They don't respect necessarily the integrity of a piece of original art and the fact that someone's imagination has spawned it. Or if not their imagination, their facility with a particular medium. They'll just see it as a dollar-saving exercise. But I suspect after the initial rush of all of that, people will start to hunger for evidence of a human hand at work and a human mind behind that hand. It's like when they said CDs came along, they said that's the end of vinyl. Vinyl will disappear. Well, vinyl hasn't really disappeared, right? Because people wanted to hear, and God knows it's expensive enough now, I wouldn't be buying, but people wanted to hear, quote, the warmth of tone that comes with vinyl as opposed to the perfect sound off a CD. It may not have that warmth like the vinyl did. So, I think it's like if you buy mass-produced white bread from the supermarket, or do you want, which has a particular texture and flavour, or you want a nicely baked loaf of bread from the local bakery that does their own and has their own formula, and it's got completely different shape, texture, and flavour. Almost all better than the mass manufactured one. And I suspect that's where art is going to go. People will still want it. And I know, but I know it's sort of people wanting to careers in art at the moment. That's right down on the list of possible careers. But I think, what no one's really said, with after 3 years lockdown and COVID, what were people doing? They were looking at art in one form or another, whether that's movies, books, television, whatever. right? It's all an expression of art, and
Mm.
so don't knock it, because a lot of people would have gone up, up the wall, across the ceiling, down the other side without it while they were locked down.
Yeah, they sure have. I think that's a really nice analogy, actually. How you put it there is that it is essentially like going and getting your home brand white loaf, or having a look at something that tastes far better. Like um, I
It's just a
also
waiting
sort of,
game. How long will it take for that to happen? It may be 5 years or so.
man, it is a waiting game, and it's dreadful to think that it's got here to it. Like I'm dead against it, man. Like I hate the fact. I have spoken about it before. In no way am I um, advocating for it. It makes me sick, to be honest with you. Like people nicking other people's stuff, and like just thinking they can do whatever they want to do with other
Yeah,
people's work. The sad part is, for me, is it just feels like a product of the times, man, where that's what people are seem to be doing in life and in general anyway. They just take what they want. There's no like recompense. They don't care. It's mine. Like it's
yeah,
just a whole narcissistic, like mindset. And I know you get your little corporate mongers up there that are trying to save their dollars and cents and shit, like to make a couple of bucks. But I mean, mate, what it boils down to is no, you take art, you take human self-expression from like a society. There's no culture, and I don't know of any like evidence of a tribe or a social gathering or a nation that hasn't gone real well without a culture, man.
yeah.
And it's just clone doing all this stuff. It really does, and I get really. I don't get into it with people. I'm not into online stuff, but I read it and I'm just like, really, like you know, you're trying to argue a point. It's like, and not everyone's good at everything, like, and
Yeah,
there's a lot of people out there like yourself, like me, like other people I know, like writers, man, like other artists. I mean, people have put their whole lives, man, into like getting to where they've gotten. Some better than others, it doesn't matter. But the time, the effort, their voice, their what they've gone through in life, man, to put onto these pages. And then you got some dick just comes in and like in 2 minutes, I should be able to do that. Why
yeah,
don't I have a right to be like, man, do the work, dude. Don't
yeah.
cheat, don't steal. But it really does make me sick. But anyway, that's just where I'm at on it. I don't even. Um, oh yeah, yeah. There's people around that advocate it, and that's one of the things for me with
I suspect we're going to get deluged by it, and it's just a matter of time to let that big
mm,
wave die down and go back out and
mm,
see what is left, what has changed, or
mm,
or do people get, human beings have notoriously short attention spans, right? And then
yeah,
it'll no longer be the flavour of the month. People will want something else,
yeah,
and that's what I suspect in the medium to long term what will happen,
mm,
because human beings get bored.
yeah. They do, man, and it is funny, as you said too, during COVID, like everyone went for the creative arts, but the minute that like society starts flowing again, and everyone's into
Yeah,
their 70-hour weeks and losing sight of themselves, like they all want that quick fix, and they never finish that thing they started. But that's what it is, but I just think, man, if you've got the compulsion and you want to learn, and every like being creative is a beautiful thing, man. Like it's so unique to each individual, like I mean, just look in the medium that we both love, it's like we both share a love for it. But like for me, I come from it from a science fiction perspective, where you love it, and like as you said earlier, you have it from like a noir, like
Oh,
sort of,
also, yeah, it's slice of life stories, and sort of like if I had to go back and think of what I was reading back in the 80s, it was like Crumb and Harvey Picard, and there was Eddie Campbell stuff from when he was living in England. What else was there? There's a whole bunch of others. I wasn't a massive fan of Love and Rockets, but I did occasionally read them. Again, it's all part of the same sort of grist for the same mill. I'm sure I'm missing somebody, but and there's also because I actually feel like with biographical stuff or autobiographical stuff, it doesn't even have to be pure autobiographical. It can be a work of fiction where you may have pillaged your own experiences in order to create something on the page. It may not actually be a record of some sort of event. It could be just hopefully the distillation of some event, or how you felt about it, or what truth, however subjective, you may have learnt about it. So and boil that down into a little story.
Yeah. No, I have a great appreciation for that sort of work too. Where people have taken a particular genre, but you can tell that that's them getting their, themselves out, as you said, distilling it into, a particular frame of work or a genre, I guess, because some people, I guess, too, to a certain extent, don't have the courage in themselves to, tell from, put them in the screen, you know what I mean? And that's cool, like you still get it across. I mean, these are the nuances, man, that like the little pirate, like creators that we were talking about early, you know what I mean? We'll never understand, man, is, like that whole, these little sense and sensibilities that, like everyone puts into their work, mate, the doubts and the positives, and, like even, I've spoken to him about you this evening, but even, like Greg Gates, as much as I admire Tired of Dreams, the artwork there, and it blew my mind like 20 or 30 years after he did it, I'm sure that at that stage, that man doing some of those pages would have had doubts about himself doing some of those, like lines, and would have had those fears. Will this
Indeed.
cover? And
Indeed,
and,
I can say that you're quite correct in that assumption.
Yeah. So, and you're not going to get that from someone that types in a few words and brings up an image. But
one of the things with, say, action stories, whether you're watching a movie or reading a book or reading a graphic story, in their haste to get from point A to point B to point C and the finish, I often don't take the time to explore moments, often where the real drama is, which is why I sort of write like little vignettes. So that's not really 4 pages is really just a vignette, just a moment. But you can, that moment can be really interesting if you take the time to examine it. So that's why Blue Smoke and Feet of Clay sort of exist, because it's really just a collection of short moments, really.
Yeah, but they're powerful, man. It's also a reflection of the beauty of the comics medium too, because it's like like you don't have to have you don't have to make like I don't know, a 500-page story if you don't want to. Like, I mean, the story in particular that really like got me in this was this Dead Stop by you and Malcolm Ritchie.
Right.
And inks Greg Gates with assistance from Dylan Naylor. And I don't want to spoil it for people, but it
That was a true story of a friend from high school.
yeah,
So all of that story is essentially real.
man, I picked that up because it came from a perspective of I, I I thought when I read those 4 pages that couldn't have come from anything but um, a real moment with someone, because
If
it's
if
just
I
something I
really
recognised in it.
if I
Just from
really
maybe.
would say to do that story now, I'd
Mm,
have all the quotes in those caption boxes in different types of typefaces, because they're meant to be lots of different people's voices, not just the one voice of
gotcha.
talking about it. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure whether that came across there, but
yeah.
that was but just due to limitations of time and effort. So it was just hand lettered instead of typeset. Didn't have the resources back then to do that.
Man, that's such nice lettering too. The hand lettering, it's really nice. Like, yeah, Greg's done well there. But like, that was a powerful, really powerful, resonated for me. 4 page story, man. Great writing, great artwork, really cool. I mean, Red Dog is another one. Um, just
And
completely.
that's a work of fiction, because none of that has actually happened that I've experienced. But a friend who was living with, or for a while, living with a woman with 2 children from previous marriage, right?
Yeah,
And when I was
yeah,
over visiting him, the woman's ex-husband turned up because he wanted to see his kids, right?
yeah.
And my mate said, and there was a bit of tension, shall we say?
Mm,
And my friend said to me, "Oh, thank God you're here. Who knows what would have happened if you weren't here?" And that was the springboard for that idea. What if I
yeah, yeah,
wasn't there? You
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. No, man, it's yeah, yeah. Sorry to the audience there. I'm just getting caught up. Like, I've been like,
Oh,
yeah,
look,
like
Blue
there's.
Smoke's been out there for many years. I think it's originally published. We did 300 copies, and
Mm,
I've got about 80 left.
yeah,
So
yeah,
there's 220 copies out there floating around Australia, one place or another, over the
yeah, yeah.
last 25 years. So
Oh
I
man,
think
I'm.
it's been. Yeah.
I just want to try and help, like get people out there and recognize that you've got so much stuff, man. Like it's there's publishers that do a lot of publishing, but like I said to you earlier, and what caught me off guard is like there's a huge amount of variety in this work that in your publishing house that, like I think anyone would find something that they would like, mate. Like the,
Yeah.
the thing, the story with like Dream of Tides I was talking about last night, is there's so many elements of like that mysticism and, like mystery to it, but the darkness and, but there's also like that 40s 50s sort of I guess those black and white monster movie type vibe, HB
Yeah.
Lovecraftian vibes to it. So there's that, but then there's your short noir stories, and then there is your slice of lives that you've got that are funny, man. Like some of those things that Dave was doing in that book were like
Yeah.
funny. Like I was chuckling, and like that was like after putting one down, going back to this book and like thinking like, what a sad man, that story's heartbreaking, and then finding myself like
Yeah, I
15
know.
away. And that's like awesome.
That's one of Dave's great strengths. He can write a really poignant, sort of touching story, and the
Yeah.
next one can be having you laughing out loud.
Mm.
Usually at his own misfortune, but which
Yeah,
he's not. He doesn't hold back from sharing.
yeah, but man, like so can you, mate. Like that's what I mean. Is like the stories that you wrote in Blue Smoke are affecting, like as I said, like that dead stop. Like now you tell me it was a true story. I felt like it was very real when I read it, and one of my thoughts was that's got to be like based on a true story, it also I've lost friends over the years and
Yeah.
things, and um, that's the beauty of comics, man, and the medium in itself is that, like, as we've talked about, you can start off, like enjoying superheroes and stuff, which nothing wrong with that. We've all done that. You both, not, there's heaps of people done that because that's what it was available. But then, as you go into the depths and you start pushing through the shelves and stuff, like you start finding some voices, man, and some like people that have got some shit to say that sometimes it seems that people don't want to go there because they don't want to go into, like, it's like, that I think for me, I think David Lynch says it with his quote when they were talking about his childhood, where he was like, he grew up in Missoula, Montana, and everything was white picket fences and green grass and the rose bushes and
Yeah.
everything was perfect. But then when you went into
Right.
the grass and the ants and they were eating each other, and as you went, like under the house and all that sort of stuff, there's just all these different varieties of life and
Which are
stories.
almost the
Very,
opening.
yeah, which is pretty much it. And I greatly admire that, man. That sort of storytelling. It's very, very gutsy. And I think telling true stories and stuff and slice of life stuff is very ballsy, man, because they've affected me with how much courage it takes for people to put that stuff out there as well. So, yeah, I think that's pretty awesome, man.
I was going to say, you haven't reflected because on the fact that there's 4 prose stories with illustrations. Now, strictly speaking, they're not comics.
Now, true. This is true. Yes.
And I was almost going to say something like collaboration is almost a younger man's game these days, because I find I've got enough energy to write the story down and hopefully cut and polish it into something, but I haven't written probably a comic script for a while now. So and it's just the having the energy to sort of, what's the word, not explain the story so much, but sort of to try to communicate the moments you want to explore with the artist, and they may have a completely different take, which is fine.
Yeah.
But as I've got older, I want to control the pacing and the speed of the story and what's being observed myself. So that's why I've written it in prose. So, but look, I promise I'll do a few more comic scripts. I've got once I do finish Greg's current book, there'll be 3 books next year and 3 books the year after. So I've got roughly a plan. I haven't got just the notion. It all depends how much Hodgson can get done now. So because he's 75 now, because I'm 65, but he's 75. So what he can actually get done in the next 5 years or so, I don't, life will take its own courses.
Sure does, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he'll hopefully get he's working on the book 3 of Anyhow Town, but I know he's got plans for another couple of collections of stories after that. I think he's written one, but he hasn't, and he's done notes for the other. So hopefully he'll get that down on paper.
Oh man, hopefully it's man, you're going to cost me a fortune, hey? It's like all those books around. It's like, no, I'm cool, man. Like, I'm hooked. Like, I like it all. It's really lovely, man. It's a really broad landscape of what you've created, and I highly recommend anyone to track these down. As David said tonight, you can reach him on Facebook via Messenger and stuff like that. And it's just, man, it's just lovely to see such a wide variety of, like, and the other beautiful thing is, David, it's like a group of blokes that met when you were younger with a passion, and it all brought you together, and you're still here, like, even though you've had your time apart doing, life, but you've all come back, and you've all, whether old mate's up in the Adelaide Hills and he's half retired and he's just chilling out, or whether stories are coming, people are still working. And it's just that's the compulsive nature.
If you ask me, will I still be doing this in 5 years' time? I'll say, yeah, probably. Will I be doing it in 10 years' time? I don't know. So I am part of that generation. We're the long timers. There's fewer days in front than there are behind. So
yeah. No, I hope you keep doing it, man. It's I think you're doing really well, like with doing everything, great writing, great little publishing wing, man, and publishing house that you got, and like bringing back Australian classics, which as I said earlier this evening, if I hadn't have had a copy of Tired of Dreams, man, I wouldn't have discovered that story. And like I said on the review show last night, that the stuff I like, I draw on this table and on that desk that's there, and the stuff that I like that and you're having those little moments where I should look at something, I need to get a little spark here. Tired of Dreams is on this table now, mate.
Thank you.
And isn't
now,
going.
Can I make an unscheduled pit stop? I'll be 2 minutes.
Yeah, man, sure. We can do that.
Sorry to keep you hanging.
Hey, that's all right, mate. I'll Shane, bring up that single screen, man. So if you're there, bud, or if there's any comments that are out there, I can answer that while Dave has a brief moment to himself. Shawnee, the one book in me. People will get no satisfaction from the cheating and move on. The one book in me, people. That's exactly right. AI makes my brain vomit. Andrew Law. There you go. I'm glad to see there's other people. Naughtiest. I'm hoping AI makes paper stuff more valuable. You never know. That might be what happens in the end. Andrew, yeah, agree. Digital was going to destroy books, but it didn't happen. Yes, it's the industrial processes of everything. And Absinthe, resonating with a piece of art is always a beautiful thing. Absolutely, man. That's why we do it, and that's why we appreciate it, and that's why we just chug along and do what we do. KJB, evening, fellas and fellow chinwaggers. Thanks for coming back, KJB. It's nice to see you again, and nice to see lovely comments, mate. Thank you for always supporting. Jeffrey, I did my training through bromide machines too. There you go. You had been sitting there like listening to David talk, like bringing back old memories, Jeffrey. So, funny, eh? It's how everything goes. Mr. Challoner, great trip down memory lane. Looks to the reprint future. Brilliant stuff. Thank you for always watching and supporting the show, Mr. C, and everyone that said those comments. Just while you're back, we just had a couple of comments about AI and people agreeing and stuff like that. And Mr. Challoner just sent a message in there, mate, just saying brilliant stuff on reprints and the publishing and all that sort of stuff. So, and good walk down memory lane. So, it's always nice to hear from everyone out there. It's funny, like when you got like when I do this, and it's like I recognize people's names now that give comments and stuff, and it's funny, like it's really very nice of people to watch the show and support comics and Chinwag and stuff, man, so and support David too. It's David, so like, man, what in your extensive experience, man, for anyone out there that catches us now or in the future or anything, what are some of your words of wisdom out there for anyone that wants to get into comic books? What you've learned along the way? What would you sit here and talk to me if I asked you?
Okay. Well, if someone wants to put out a fairly sophisticated looking comic book now, you can do that with digital output. And when I say relatively inexpensively, say if you're writing, drawing, and inking it yourself, right? And you can, if you lay it out on InDesign and do PDFs, and you can liaise with a printer. And even if you can't, if you sort of have a chat to Baden Baden Kurgan, who does Jeffrey's printing.
Yep.
He is more than helpful in helping you realise a finished product from artwork. So you can do that all relatively inexpensively. It doesn't have to break the bank. You can do as good a looking a book as what the majors put out, if that's what you want to do.
Mm.
On the other hand, there is a whole section of the Australian comic scene which is more slanted to fine art practice and poetry and very individual, ephemeral sort of material. And you'll see that at the Festival of the Photocopier, which is huge, absolutely enormous. And you'll have the whole gamut of little 2-color folded and hand stapled little minis, just like 12 pages or something, up to someone's done a full 46-page color graphic novel, and it's got the whole works on it, right? It might have very individual sort of art style or subject matter, and you've got every shade of everything else in between the two, right? It all depends what you want to get out of it, right? If you want to do books like Marvel and DC, you can. I'm not sure whether people in doing that is because they want to work at Marvel or DC, but they haven't decided to go over there and try or to get into that scene, or whether they just want to do that sort of stuff at home. Do whatever makes you feel happy. Do whatever that satisfies your passion, right? I know that I'm trying not to sound cliched here, but it's essentially true. But do it because it has meaning for you. Don't worry about what the next person will think about it. As long as you're proud of the effort. I mean, I can sit back at 60 and say 65 now because I'm 65. That's what I get out of it, right? I don't need to have the next person like it because I like it, and I'm doing it in such small quantities that basically, a few dozen people are seeing it, and that's enough for me. All right. If I sell through, I just print a few more off, and I haven't broken the bank or anything like that. But yeah, you can get a very sophisticated result for very little outlay. It all depends how dedicated you are. And there's stuff out there that you just would not believe. From I know there's a huge gamut of stuff being put together just from the people you've interviewed and who are visible in the scene, right?
Yeah.
But there's still so much more out there. So yeah, look, enjoy yourself doing it, right? That's become the most important thing for me. And and if there's a small group of people that read it and enjoy it, well, that's a bonus.
I think that's pretty cool words, man, because it's like you got to do it for yourself to begin with.
I don't dream of glory anymore, like maybe when the Fox was really hitting its stride, and I thought we've got as big as we can get. We're going to break into a bigger audience, and it never quite happened. So that was a bit of a tough pill to swallow at the time. But look,
but you know what? There were, as I said, I was on a review show last night, and Ed Kearsley, same age fella as me, that does comic books, and he's done them since he was a young fella. Knew exactly who Fox Comics were and exactly what it had done at that particular point in time for the Melbourne comic scene and the Australian comic scene. I'm aware. There's other people I know that are very well aware of it. So, much like your friend that got despondent about things, you made your mark, because there's other people out there that are very well aware of the effort and
because it seems so long ago now that we're almost like we're well and truly slipping into the past. So there's been a couple of generations of people who've come along who are doing comics and thought, well, we had our moment in the sun, and if no one's really aware of it now, well, that's okay, So
yeah, no, well, it's great. So I'm trying to make people aware of it that aren't aware of it, because I want people to buy your books, mate, and
Thank you.
go and touch base with this stuff, because it's beautiful stuff. And I'm going to be getting, I'll be in contact with you soon to get more of these. I have to go on a bloody payment plan with you, David, the way it's going. You're pumping out those books, I'll be like paying you off for 12 months, mate. Like with that magic. But it's, yeah, no, really, really cool, man, to have met you tonight. I know several people that I know have spoken very highly of what you've done and what you're doing. Uh, like the other thing is too, with the like with chinwags and stuff. For anyone watching, and I've never really said it before, I always have at the start of the show, we always have like a bit of an intro and a bit of a this and that. Some of you have seen it, but Chinwag started as me just getting to self-indulgently, I guess, be in front of a camera and talk to people that I wanted to meet. And then over time, I realized that I was falling deeply in love with everyone's stories and the stories and the history with Australian comics, both new and old. And through doing so many of them and having little breaks in between to re-identify and recalibrate, I and Shane wanted to identify Chinwag as we realised that to a certain extent we were both had the great honour of digitally recording a library of people in the Australian comic book community per se now in the moment, but also capturing the stories of their history and their past and their stories, which are the main reasons, which are the most important stories of all. And David, I'm really, really grateful that you were part of the Chinwag family tonight, man. It's really, really cool. The other thing I do want to say is hopefully with time and patience and reaching out to more and more people, Chinwag and Comics will be able to get out to like the smaller niches of people, as you were describing, and be able to invite those people on the show as well. Because to me, like you were saying, I mean, I started in comic books and stuff, but I'm well aware of like the pros and like all the things that are tied in together and creativity in general, man. And I'd very much like to push out into those areas and bring those creators on too, so they can share their stories as well. Because you never know what someone's got to say. You never know what they can say or teach someone out there. And like part of the journey is learning, man. And like that's what it's all about, man. So that's the mission for me and Sis moving forward with Chinwags, and has been for a long while now. And yeah, it's a great privilege, man, to meet you and all the other like people. As we wind down the show, Mr. Bird, is there? Rick Smith, Mike N here, saying hi. Working with Dave, Dylan, and Greg in the early days of the '90s was an invaluable comic book education. Cheers to all. Mike Nason, if you missed it earlier, happy birthday for next Tuesday, mate. And Andrew Law also said happy birthday too. So you got two, mate. So there you go. Hadn't forgotten. And thanks for tuning in. Mate, as we wind down the show, and you've said for people to keep going and not give up and do it for yourself and things like that. One more, and we know that you've it's a compulsion for you, and we know that you had to do it because like once you got that power back to do it all again, like you started feeling good, and life just felt like you're right back in there, connections with your mates and stuff like that from long past, man, like which helps and all, beautiful thing, man. Like comic books is how it is, and everything's connected and it's lovely. Again, for all the people at home, David, where can they get you? What books are available? Do they just talk to you if they message you on Facebook about what they're interested in?
You can message me on Facebook. If you trawl through a couple of Facebook pages comic pages I'm a member of, you will find most things that are available mentioned, or in some ways, if you do a search for my entries or someone else's my entries mainly, you'll see most covers of things. Oh no, I won't drag it out anymore. But yeah, so or just PM me and ask for a list, and
Oh, you know what, David? You're such a pleasure. You've been such a pleasure to have on tonight. Chuck up a couple of covers just to entice some people's appetites,
right.
and show them what you got out there, because you never know, man. You know,
What
you're right, man. Take your time. They're all too good.
There's a book by Hodgson and one of his friends who wrote it, called The Many Moods of Dr. Stupid.
Yeah.
Has to be read to be believed. It was originally a collection of unconnected stories, but I did find a thread. Hodgson sent them all over to me when he finished. He says they'd been done over a period of 9 years, and he said, how funny is the damn thing? So there's jocks to be had. So I put them in some sort of order, and it's had a life of its own. It's had more compliments than I thought it would get. But so there's one.
Yeah.
That was the Ian Eddy collection. That's Unseen and Unexpurgated. So that's it was 8 issues that he'd originally done, and of which only two ever saw print. So that's all in black and white, except for the exception of a couple of colour pages up showing the original covers.
Yep.
That's probably the most expensive one. That's about $30. That's about 220 pages. So that's a job by Jeffrey. So that's a Jeffrey printing job. Now, going back to 2007, before I suspended activity for a few years, this was the Bitter Bachelor book. There was a book that come out. It was a comic book that come out called The Girl's Guide to Guy Stuff, and I sort of said, "Oh, fair enough," but I felt that I could do an answer to it, right? So, and it's really just an anthology. There's stories by Dave Hodgson and Brendan Boyd and myself and a few other people. So I suppose it's, how would I call it? Stories about men navigating that tempestuous sea called relationships.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you can take it from there. So, I don't retreat from anything that's in the book.
Yeah. If I was to write a book like that, it'd be a horror novel.
Oh, look, I reckon if I attempted to do a book like this now, I suspect the woke police would come after me with burning torches. So, not that there's anything particularly contentious in there, but it's just the sign of the times.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's cool, man. All right, so everyone, Facebook, David Bird, and the Australian pre-comic decimals or pre-2010 stuff like that. You can track you down.
It's Daniel Best's page.
Daniel Best. Yeah. Reach out to Daniel Best even. Like, he knows what's going on.
He has been a solid supporter of Paper Tableau since I revived the label back in 2020. So
Daniel Best is a champion, mate. It's no dramas with that, man. I'm friends with him absolutely. He's a fellow chinwagger as well, mate. He's part of the family too. So it's you found out all about Paper Tableau, and you found out about David Bird, his involvement in everything, and still bringing forward classic Australian comic books again that I recommend. Man, David, I've highly enjoyed this evening. Thank you so much again. I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
My pleasure, man. And I always feel I am. I'm very grateful that I get to do Chinwag, man, and meet people that I greatly admire and stuff every week. So thank you. And welcome to the Chinwag family, man. And yeah, if there's anything I can help you with, or, in the future, just give me a buzz. You know where to find me.
All right.
And all right. So thank you to everyone for out there watching in the past, present, and future. And all the 3, 4, and 5 Ds and whatever it is, and time, space, and interface. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share comments on all the socials. I'm hoping this evening, I haven't heard word yet, but I am hoping that we got to 500 subscribers. It would be absolutely wonderful if we did this evening. So that's a goal. So hopefully we got there. Maybe someone can tell me before the end of this show and leave me hanging. Thank you, Jeffrey. Always a pleasure to have you. There you go, David. Right. Nick May has already sent you a message, mate. So, Nick mucking around. Thank you, Absinthe, for always supporting Chinwag and Comex. So everyone, as we always say, your mission actually this week for anyone watching is there's a lot of sadness out in the world. There's a lot of people doing it hard out there. Andrew Law, 499, get over to 500. Come on, people. So your mission this week for anyone that wants to accept it is to go out there and say good day to someone and make them smile, because smiling goes a long way. And look after your brothers and sisters. Our community is unity, and Chinwag is and always will be made with love. Thank you. See you next week. See you, David. Be good, man.
See you later, mate.
Bye-bye.
This show is sponsored by the Comex Shop. Check out over to comex.shop to pick up a variety of Australian comics from multiple creators and publishers, all for one flat postage rate. We hope you enjoyed the show.